All right, good morning, everyone. And this morning, as we continue our series in the book of Esther, we find ourselves right smack dab in the middle. Okay, this is a 6-sermon series. We're at number 3. Pastor Neal kicked it off a couple weeks ago and then followed it up last week while we were suffering at the shore. Because Christine and I took our break, and boy, was it nice, perfect weather. Everything was just right. We almost didn't come back. No, I'm just kidding. We did. We had to get back. But here we are, and we're right in the middle of this sermon series on the book of Esther. And before we move deeper into the story, let's just recap a little bit of what we know, all right? Or if you maybe perhaps are just jumping into this the first day in this series, this first week, well, then you missed the first 2, so let's recap a little bit. You know, in chapter 1, we learned that the king of Persia removed his queen from her royal position because she did not do what he told her to do, Queen Vashti. And so, though he regretted it after the fact, there was no turning back time. He couldn't fix it that way. So instead, he did what every king would do. He held a beauty contest. And from all over the kingdom, beautiful young ladies were part of that. And eventually one won, and that was Esther. And so they placed a crown on Esther's head and made her queen, and she filled that position. But nobody knew her true identity, not even the king. You see, Mordecai said to Esther, who, by the way, adopted her at a young age, he said, don't tell anybody your heritage. Keep it a secret. Don't let them know you are a Jew, because it really possibly could have affected the outcome of the beauty contest. And she may never have gotten into that position at all, because the Jews were looked at as lowly people in the eyes of the Persians. And they were, after all, a conquered people. So nobody, including the king himself, knew that Esther was a Jew. Now, fast forwarding a bit into the story, Mordecai upsets Haman. Haman is second in command to the king. He is what they called the prime minister. And he upset Haman because he refused to follow the king's edict, and that was to bow down in Haman's presence to show him honor. It really was not just honor as an appreciation for his position. It was really kind of a worship, because the king was, like himself, elevating Haman up to this place of godship. And so others were to bow down in his presence, but Mordecai refused, and that upset Haman. And why did he refuse? Well, because he was a Jew, and his faith dictated that he bowed down to nobody but God. And so it would have been a form of idolatry, and Mordecai refused to do it. And this outraged Haman to no end. Not only did he want to dispose of Mordecai, but he was going to go even further. And he was going to attempt to develop a plan that all of the Jews in the kingdom that lived in the boundaries of the kingdom would be killed as well, annihilated. It would have been complete genocide is what it would be. So after some conniving and speaking with the king about this, he convinced the king to sign it into law, that on a particular day in the 12th month of the year, all of the Jews, men, women, and children, would be annihilated. And one of the takeaways that Pastor Neal left us with last week, even though I wasn't here physically, I was able to watch online. I sure appreciate that. But one of the takeaways that Pastor Neal left us with concerning this was this: when we do what is right in the wrong culture, well, persecution can come. Right? Isn't that right? When we do what is right in the wrong culture, persecution can come. Is this not what happened to Mordecai himself when he refused to bow down to Haman? Persecution has now come in the story as we make our way through. It has now come to the entire Jewish nation. And so one could say, if one wanted to point a finger, listen now, it's Mordecai's fault. I wonder how many people said that at the time. Oh, look what's going to happen to all of us now because of Mordecai. Because he was not willing to just go along with it, to compromise a little bit. It's all Mordecai's fault that we are in this predicament. Now, let's hold on to that thought as we make our way into this sermon today. Let's turn in our books to Esther chapter 4, or if you have your bulletin, you can open it up and follow that way. If you're watching online, we welcome you as well. And if you have access to a Bible, I'd appreciate it if you would open that up and go to Esther in the Old Testament and follow along chapter 4. Now I have written it's in the bulletin that it's going to be chapter 4, verse 1, all the way to 5:8. Trust me, we can't be here that long. It would just take too much time. So we're going to cut it off just at the end of chapter 4, and that's where we'll end it, verse 17. All right. So just to begin the first two verses of chapter 4, the author writes this: When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. But he went only as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. All right, so Mordecai has taken on the posture of one who is grieving, one who is mourning, okay? And rightly so. He has gone into deep mourning. He's grieving the king's decision and edict. So the custom was, when you grieve or you mourn, you put on sackcloth. Now, sackcloth was really a garment made of goat's hair, usually. It could be camel hair, but most usually it was made of goat's hair. And, you know, it really should be called hair cloth, because that is exactly what it is. And it was incredibly itchy. Now, if you've ever gotten a haircut, gentlemen probably, more than ladies, if you've ever gotten a haircut and a little bit of that hair just drops down the back of your collar, the rest of the day is shot. You are itching and itching and itching. It is, you know what I'm talking about. It's terrible, right? It is nerve-wracking. Now imagine if that is all over your entire body and you can't stop scratching. That's what it would be like to wear a hair cloth. That's what it would be like. Enough to drive you insane. And that is the wonderful thing about sackcloth. The wonderful thing. It was meant to keep you from comfort. It was to make you be uncomfortable so that you would take seriously the predicament that you're in. It had a purpose, kind of an odd thing in our culture to think about. But back in the day, well, that's what they did. They were to put that on, and that way it would keep them constantly reminded of what was deeply troubling them, or this very serious predicament that they may be in. And then you'd throw on just a little ashes to boot, and you'd rub that all over your face. And then, if that was the case, you would be completely dressed in the right attire to do some serious mourning and grieving. This is how Mordecai was dressed at the king's gate. He had ashes all over his face. He was in sackcloth. He was mourning and wailing and crying out and bitterly, and probably scratching a lot as well. All of this is going on, and he would have probably been quite a sight to behold for those inside the gate and those who gathered around it. But not only Mordecai was responding to his predicament this way, many Jews throughout the kingdom were as well. Picking it up in verse 3, and we'll read down a few more verses. In every province to which the edict and order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. There it is again. So it's fasting and weeping and wailing, and of course, sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's eunuchs and female attendants came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. You know, Esther whether it was due to embarrassment that she may have been experiencing at the time, recognizing that there is her uncle and he is making quite a scene right at the king's gate. Whether it's because of that, or maybe she just didn't understand what was going on in his life that would cause him to act in such a way, and she didn't know anything that was going on, because, by the way, she didn't know what was going on. That'll come up in a moment as we continue reading. Whatever it was that caused her to do this, she sent him clothing and said, basically, put some clothes on. Put some clothes on. I want to get you back to normal here, because this was troubling her for one reason or another. But Mordecai refused. Verse 5. Then Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs assigned to attend her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. What was it that he refused to take off the sackcloth and ashes? What could be going on? Esther was insulated in the palace, and she didn't know that the king had signed this decree. She did not know that it went out to the various provinces, to all of the leaders in those provinces. She was completely unaware of this. She was insulated in the king's palace. So, verse 6, so Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show to Esther and explain to her. And he told him to instruct her to go into the king's presence to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their life. That was the law. You did not approach the king uninvited. And if you did, well, there was a hefty price to pay for sure. Unless for some crazy reason you found, the king was having a really good day or something like that. And he said, it's okay. I will not handle it in the normal way. But 30 days had passed since I was called to go to the king, Esther says. So I know what's probably going to happen if I go and approach the king. Verse 12, when Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. We don't know what's going on behind the scenes, do we? Because we cannot read God's mind. Oh, God makes clear what he wants to make clear. Let's understand that. If he wants to get a point across to you, you will not be able to, you'll know it. You'll know it. But we don't always know what's going on behind the scenes. We don't know why we are in a place in our life at a particular time. But God knows. And it's there he has placed us. And there he can use us. We have to know that. But, if you know the story of Esther, then you know how she responds to this point, to this need. But let's just do this for a second. I want to consider an alternate response, one that might mirror the way we may respond if we find this decision that we have to make dropped right on our doorstep. Let's think about it. Mordecai, you're asking me to go to the king, and you know what could happen to me. Wait a second. Did I get us into this? No. You got us into this. You made the mess. You fix it. You approach the king. See if you can change his mind. Why are you calling me to do the work that you should be doing? I didn't do it. I didn't break it. So why do I have to try to fix it? It's unfair. Have you ever been there? Fixing someone else's mess and wondering to yourself, why in the world do I have to do this? No, I don't want to do this. This isn't fair. Esther could very possibly have felt that way if she did, as a human being. Ask the question, Mordecai, come on now, that is too much to ask. Here's another idea, Mordecai. Why don't you just fix it by going and apologizing to Haman, right? Apologize to him. Make things right between you two. Fix what you have broken in the relationship. Grovel, if that's what it takes. Get on his good side. Do whatever you can to fix the issue. If you have to, just bow down to him. You don't even have to mean it. God will understand. Just bow down to him for Pete's sake, because everyone's life is on the line here. Do you see what's going on, Mordecai? Take the utilitarian approach. Compromise. Do what will bring the most benefit to the greatest number of people. Just compromise. But you know what? Esther knows that that is not the appropriate response. As a believer in Yahweh, in the true God, she knows that compromising her faith is not the right response. So she also knows that it is not right for her to expect Mordecai to compromise his faith. What's most important when we are facing dilemmas, when we are facing decisions to make, is simply to do the right thing and leave the details in God's hands. Does that make sense? To do what is right. Remain faithful to who we are as followers of Christ and allow the details to be left in God's hands to work out. First and foremost is to be faithful to God. This is the only acceptable response. And Queen Esther knows that. But she also knows this. She's in a pickle. It does not change that fact. And she has to make a decision. According to the king's decree, the very fate of the Jewish nation is riding on her response to this crisis. If she keeps quiet, the whole nation is probably going to just die. Unless God shows up in another way, like Mordecai suggests, and raises somebody else up to fulfill what Esther should be doing. But if she speaks up, she might lose her life even before she gets to make her plea to the king. It might go that way. She doesn't know. Esther is at what they would call a fork in the road. Have you ever been at the fork in the road? You have two decisions to make, and neither one really sounds like the good one. But you're there, and you have to make a decision. You know what the late Yogi Berra said about coming to a fork in the road? This is what he said. If you come to a fork in the road, be sure to pick it up. Be sure to pick it up. And I bet right now, that is exactly what Esther would like to do at this moment, to pick that fork up and throw it as far away as she can, as far as possible, so she will never have to deal with it. So she'll never have to face it. Have you been there? You're at that place in your life, and you know there are some decisions to make, but instead of confronting them, you pick up the fork and you throw it away and you say, I'm not going to face it. I am not going to deal with this problem in my life right now. But you know what happens to ignored problems? They have a way of resurfacing and causing a lot of problems if you refuse to confront them. Ignoring our problems will only be disastrous for us, if not now, later, for sure. Listen to what the wise Dr. Seuss has to say about the matter. Did I ever tell you about the young Zode who came to a sign at the fork in the road? He looked one way and then the other too. The Zode had to make up his mind what to do. Well, the Zode scratched his head and his chin and his pants, and he said to himself, I'll be taking a chance. If I go to place 1, that place may be hot, so how will I know if I like it or not? On the other hand, though, I'll feel such a fool if I go to place 2 and find it's too cool. In that case, I may catch a cold and turn blue. So place 1 may be best and not place 2. Play safe, cried the Zode. I'll play safe. I'm no dunce. I'll simply start off to both places at once. And that's how the Zode, who would not take a chance, went no place at all with a split in his pants. I like that. You know, in the story of Alice in Wonderland, Alice comes to a fork in the road as well, and she asks the Cheshire Cat which way to turn. And the cat responds, that depends a great deal on where you want to get to. You know, the roads we take and the decisions that we are faced with, they will determine where we end up. And if anyone knew that, it had to be Queen Esther at this moment. Boy, what a big decision to make. In an instant, her perspective on life changed, don't you think? There she was, just in her comfy, cushy palace, you know, when all was well and she's on top of the world. And the next moment, this bomb is dropped right in her lap. And she realizes right now she's in a life-shattering crisis. In the time remaining, I want to look at how Esther really responds, her true response, verses 15 to 17. Let's look at those together, and then we'll talk about it. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. And I and my attendants will fast as you do. And when this is done, I'll go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. If I die, I die. So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. You know, there are 3 things I want to point out as we wrap this up today. 3 things I want to point out that made Esther really, I think, an outstanding example of courage in crisis. You know, we do face crises. Crises. We do face them in our lives. And to have courage in them, maybe we want to follow an example that Esther shows us here. Number 1, when she realizes that there is no way to avoid her responsibility to her people and to God, she immediately begins to do what? To prepare a plan. She begins to prepare a plan. She acknowledges the crisis. She didn't ignore it or deny it. And then she develops a plan to confront it, hopefully, in the end, even to resolve it. But remember, she has no idea what the outcome's going to be because she's not reading her own story. She's living it. But she has determined to do the right thing and to do her part. You know, if we all just simply did our part, the part that God gives us, the role that he gives us in whatever situation we are in, so that we remain faithful to him. If we all simply did that, how the world would be changed by us. First, she instructs Mordecai to gather all his fellow Jews together to do what? What does she call Mordecai and all the other Jews to do? To plan out their attack? To begin a revolt? To take up arms against the king? We're going to fix this way? No, absolutely not. She says, gather all of your fellow Jews together to do 2 things, to pray and to fast. You know, that's always what went together. You know, it says to fast, but to fast always accompany prayer, because there would be no other reason to fast. It didn't even need to be said in the book, because this was written to those who understood what fasting was all about. It wasn't just not eating. It was so that you could get serious with an issue and turn to God and just cry out to him as long as it took to get satisfaction. So fast and pray. It always went together. And that's what she's calling Mordecai and his fellow Jews to do on her behalf, because she has to go now and approach the king. When you are facing a crisis and you don't know the outcome, it is always wise to stop what you're doing and take time to pray, to seek God, to seek his wisdom in the matter, and to seek his help. You know, we may not know the outcome, but God does. He knows everything about it. And so it's wise to go to him. He knows every minute little detail. And when we seek him and his righteousness and his wisdom, then we allow him to guide our steps, to take over. You know, there's that little bumper sticker that I have seen in the past. I don't see it anymore. And that is, God is my what? When it comes to a car, my co-pilot, right? And I just think, I understand the sentiment, right? The idea. But I think you miss the boat when you go, God is my co-pilot. God is the pilot, right? God is the pilot. He knows where to go. He knows how to get there. He doesn't need our help in that way. He just simply says, trust me, follow me, sit in the passenger seat. Let me drive. Let me fly. Let me get you to where I want to take you, and stop trying to think this is some sort of cooperation in the decision making. It's not. God says, I'm putting you where you are for a purpose. Trust me. I'm taking you to that place for a purpose. Then just go there by faith and stop asking so many questions and stop worrying so much. Simply trust me. I will get you to the best possible place to fulfill my perfect plan. And it might not always be comfortable for you, but that's okay, because you're an instrument that will fulfill my great plan and purpose. And in it, you will be blessed, along with the blessing I want to share with those that I can share through you. So God is not our co-pilot. He is our pilot. Esther says, pray. Pray, seek God, trust in him. And after all that's done, after you have prayed sufficiently, then proceed. Pray and then proceed. And in her case, it was, I'll go to the king. I'll break the law and I'll go to the king. Her plan was to pray and then act. A good plan should always begin with prayer. Next, I want you to see how Esther's approach how Esther approaches this need for prayer. Not only does she give prayer priority, making it that first thing to do, but she prays passionately. You know, you want to be prepared for the road ahead, for the challenges maybe that you're facing right now. You want to be prepared? Spend time in passionate prayer, seeking God and his will. You know, Esther prayed passionately. She wasn't messing around. She didn't simply offer up a prayer and move about her day and, you know, proceed into action herself. She prayed deeply. She set aside 3 days just to pray. Not even eat any food. Just pray. And so she has Mordecai put the need on the prayer chain so that there will be thousands upon thousands praying for her. For what? For courage. To take the first step out of her comfortable space and walk down the hall of the palace into a place that she was not invited. Courage. For the right opportunity to present itself. For the king's heart to be softened even before she gets there. For a favorable outcome for her people, and for God to show up in a miraculous way. Because if this was going to work at all in favor, in the way they hoped it was going to work, it means God was going to have to show up, and he was going to have to do it. You know, sometimes that's what it takes to get through a crisis. And God wants He wants me to respond to the needs that are in our life in a similar manner, to call on him, to pray to him, to sit a spell, so to say, in his presence. And then, at the right time, to proceed with the peace that he gives you. Because there will not be peace before he gives it. When you're dealing with crisis, when you're dealing with a challenge, a struggle in your life that you don't have a good answer to, and either side of the fork doesn't look like the best solution at the time. But God will give you the peace that passes common sense, that passes all understanding, the Bible says, in that time, so that you can walk in peace. You know, this is the final thought I'd like to leave you with today. When we have done all that we can do, when we have prayed and planned, that's part of the plan, to pray. When we've done all we can do, trusting God and leave the rest up to him. Leave it all up to him. You know, after Esther did all that she could do, she prayed, she put a plan together. All that was left was to trust in God and move forward in peace, the peace that he would give her in that moment. You know, that's really good advice to all of us, don't you think, when we are facing crisis. Jesus says, "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. I do not give as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid." So I don't know what you're facing. I don't know where you are right now. But maybe for such a time as this, God has placed you right where you are. And it might not be comfortable, and you might not know why you're there. But trust in him. And when that situation arises, and it might be a crisis, and it might be one that you're facing right now, when it does, turn to God. Pray. Get serious with him. And then proceed in the peace that he gives you. And he will give that to you. You know, in coming to terms with the challenges that lay ahead, Esther could peacefully say, "If I perish, I perish. If I die, I die. I've done all that I can do. God has now given me the peace, and I'm willing to face it. And I will leave the rest up to him, who is a good God, who does everything that is good and right. And I will trust him. If I die, I die. But that's not up to me. That's up to God, and I trust him." Let us say that together. Let that be the expression of our faith, which is faith in totality, holding nothing back, even our very lives. Let's think about that this day. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you, Lord, for this lesson that we are in, this wonderful book of Esther that shows courage and faith and trust. And Lord, let us take from this those lessons and apply them to our lives as we face our own real life situations that we do not know the outcome to, because we are living our own story this day. Amen.